Hey y'all, my name is Jackie Phillips and I serve as the Senior Coordinator for Student Engagement and ELS. I'm so excited for today's session of the Student Organization Zoom series, and we're joined by Drew Baker, who is also a Senior Coordinator in the Department of ELS. So I'm going to hand it over to Drew to introduce himself, and then he'll be leading us today through some considerations and helpful information regarding planning events, especially in the current environment. So Drew, thanks for being here.
Awesome, no problem. Thank you, Jackie. And I just updated my name so that way there's no confusion in the video. But I am going to share my screen. Let's hope this goes smoothly. I'm only working off like the world's cheapest laptop. So, all right, I think I'm up and running. So thank you all for tuning in or turning out for this session. Going to be talking a little bit about signature events planning during social distancing. And as Jackie said, my name is Drew Baker. I am currently the Senior Coordinator for Student Activities in Engagement, Leadership, and Service. I have been serving as the primary advisor for the University Union Programming Board for 2 full years now, just started year 3, and I have worked for over 4 years in student activities. So hopefully that's what qualifies me to speak to y'all a little bit today about how to be planning events, and especially how to be planning events right now. So before we kind of get into how we plan events right now, I want to establish a few priors that kind of establish the parameters for how we're going to talk about these socially distanced events and social distance event planning, and how that you can then carry that over into hopefully post-COVID times where it just becomes digital engagement. So even before COVID, online and digital engagement were identified as among the greatest areas for growth in student activities. I know that every NACA conference, NACA is one of the larger student activities organizations, if not the largest student activities organization in the country. Every year there are new vendors about here's how to engage your students digitally, or here's a new online platform to use, or a new way to kind of reach out to students and quote unquote meet them where they are. So this has been a growing trend, and it really became to the forefront when come March, everything pivoted to online. And even now when we're in this hybrid model, some face-to-face, a lot of the events restrictions that we currently see on campus and around the country force us to be online, or if not force us, heavily steer us towards being online. So when you think about student activities, much of student activities is rooted in tradition, and that is mostly meant in-person programming. Unions events particularly, you think about our Dogs After Darks, you think about our weekend movie showings, you think about Taste of Athens, an event I'm going to be talking more about today. Those historically are in-person, large, traditional, quote-unquote, college campus events. When you think of college student activities, when you close your eyes and picture like what the collegiate events experience is, those are the events that you think of. For some of you smaller organizations, that has probably meant things like having, participating in involvement fair, having general body meetings. When you can't have a room that has a higher occupancy of 15 people, that probably eliminates y'all just being able to simply meet in person, let alone having events in person. But kind of a byproduct of constantly doing those events in person leads us to kind of stagnant thinking. We think, oh, we've always done homecoming this way, so we're going to continue to do homecoming this way. We've always done our annual charity event this way, so if it ain't broke, we're not going to fix it. And that really stifles innovation. You don't really come up with new ideas for how to do events when you're just constantly grabbing the idea from last year and putting it forward with a new coat of paint on it. Sometimes not even a new coat of paint. At the same time, we're going to assume that most people don't want to be stuck in a Zoom room for an hour. Y'all are in class on Zoom. Y'all are doing meetings on Zoom. Y'all have every kind of virtual platform like blazing at you right now. You don't want Zoom passive programming. Now, some events that we do are passive programming. When Union has a speaker, that is a passive program. You are not actively engaged in asking Maria Taylor, who we had last week, questions unless you submitted something ahead of time. we're hoping that the content of that is engaging enough, but we understand that when we have that event, that is not as engaging to the student as that trivia night that we used to have in Tate, or when we would do a ballroom dancing class in Memorial. You're not learning a skill. You're essentially opting into another class lecture, and we want to kind of limit that to major programs. And our last prior is going to be, while no decisions have been finalized, we're reasonably expecting spring 2021 event guidance to remain very similar to fall 2020. And that's going to mean more of this virtual programming. So with all of that in mind, and the reason y'all tuned in is, well, what do we do? How do we take our signature events and how do we gear them towards this time period? And I'm going to talk a lot about that in the lens of a signature event that Union's been putting on for the last several years, and what we did this year to kind of pivot and move into a virtual format. And that event specifically is going to be Taste of Athens. So Taste of Athens is a food and culture festival that looks to introduce UGA students to some of Athens restaurants. We get catering from all around town. We coordinate it all in a single day. We really like when the restaurants come and serve the food themselves, because that means that students get to actually see the people who work for that restaurant and get to feel a little more ingrained with the local campus community. But if not, we'll serve the food ourselves. We'll hand out like menus. We'll talk about like what delivery for the place looks like, when you can like drop in, drop out, when are they open, do they have any game day specials, all that stuff. We hold it every year on Legion Field. Students receive 4 food tickets. They get to go to all the samples table. We usually get a live acoustic artist. So it really kind of has the feeling of, the kind of food and music festivals you might see in Atlanta or might see in a larger city. And we really try to kind of distill that down and make a version that is specific to Athens and specific to UGA. While the event is fun for all, we know that the student population who most attend our events and most attend all of Union's events, particularly this one, are first-year students who live on campus who are unfamiliar with UGA and Athens. By nature of having it in Legion, we are a short walk from several residence halls. Our marketing to begin with generally skews towards on-campus students. So that is really our bread and butter of this event. So I say all of that because I think the easiest way to kind of establish how are we going to move a in-person signature event to an online format is to find what the key elements of your event are, the quote unquote spirit of your event. For this event in particular, our key elements were that we wanted a local emphasis, meaning how is this event specific to Athens? We know it's food focused. We know that in person, when we give out food, there's guaranteed attendance because y'all like getting fed. Y'all like getting fed when it's just like Domino's and Papa John's. Y'all especially like getting fed when it's like Thai Spoon and Marty's at Midday and Pouch, rest in peace, and all of those like places that make like actual good food. So we wanted to capture that again. We also know it's geared towards new students, and your population might be something that is specific to your college or specific to a small interest. And that last one's probably going to come a bit more natural to you than a large campus programming board like Union. But you really want to narrow it down and what is the student population we're serving, because I think that's going to help answer a lot of questions on terms of, well, what are we going to do for this event? So kind of breaking out those 3 key elements, we started to ask ourselves questions. When you look at how do we make this a local faced event, it says, how do we still make this event Athens focused? This is when we started to know, and I'm getting ahead of myself, that we were going to move this to a cooking class. And we were going to have someone teach students how to make food, either in their apartment, in their residence hall, and just like give them that experience. But we wanted to make it Athens focused. There are thousands of chefs on YouTube, Food Channel, whatever nowadays. How do we get someone who's actually going to know about the Athens community? So that was our main focus. You see some other ones that kind of like fell out from there. How do we still support local business? Are there other ways? Are there things that are outside of food that we can like still capture and incorporate into this event? So when you think about your organization, you think about how do we continue to serve our students, you're likely going to narrow in on either the interest of your group or whether it's a, video your video game club or your service organization or whatever. You're going to know that, okay, we're the Super Smash Brothers club, so we're really going to focus in on how we get like our Super Smash Brothers guys playing online together. We're a service club. Service is really hard to do in person right now. Is there a way that we can organize either a online drive or some kind of like marketing campaign for our organization? That's going to be kind of what replaces your local part of this event. For the food, think of this in kind of the content B to the local content A. We know that a lot of reason that people turned out for this event in the past is because we fed them. So are we going to be able to feed people at all? When we started playing this event very early into kind of the socially distanced guidance, there was kind of like, you can do food, but it needs to be catered or everything needs to be individually wrapped. Um, Obviously very hard to cater for an online event, but the individually wrapped did lead us to an avenue where we said, okay, well, we're going to show people how to cook. And if we're going to show people how to cook, then can we figure out something that's going to be easy for students to recreate? That accessibility piece, that's something that, we could show students how to create like a 7-course fine dining meal, but odds are a student's going to be able to see themselves more easily cooking pasta in their residence hall, or cooking pizza or something that is a bit more college student. I say college student like I'm that far removed, or that I at the ripe age of 26 am not eating pasta and eating pizza in my apartment too. The last part was the audience, and for us that meant new students. I've already talked about how that's going to mean whatever population that your organization is used to keying in on or used to serving. For us, this led to most of our conversations on how we're going to get the word out and how to market. If you are an organization who primarily does events for your organization, you are going to be so far ahead of any organization that has either kind of a more campus-wide focus or more of a community serving focus, because you have the benefit of just saying, what events are we going to be interested in being a part of, and how do we want to dedicate our resources? For the rest of y'all, this part means how are we going to dedicate what limited socially distanced resources we have towards like getting people to attend our event or getting people interested in our events. One of the best resources that we have as union or as any kind of like university sponsored organization is that we have a relationship with housing by nature of the events that we're used to doing, whether it's on Myers or sending materials to them. So we really needed to emphasize on that to make sure that like we were still reaching students who lived in the residence halls. For other organizations, you are still able to deliver materials to the residence halls to put up, whether that's sending posters to Russell, whether that is reaching out to RHA to try and get members to participate in that. If you are, again, not an organization that is generally looking to capture a part of the student body, but just rather advertise to its own members, you can just focus on sending a listserv or sending social media out to members or using GroupMe, using Slack, Discord, any of these avenues that we now have that make digital media that much easier. But all of them have their like pros and cons in terms of how you are articulating and marketing your upcoming events to other people. So ultimately what we ended up going with, as I've said, we ended up making a virtual cooking class. Chef Hugh Atchison, and he is the executive chef and owner of 5 and 10 local Athens restaurant. The man did a 45-minute cooking demo on how to make like fresh spaghetti and sauce, like with all the tools that you as a student would be able to have, and then did 45 minutes of Q&A. Man was a champion. I'm only supposed to talk for like 30 minutes. I can only imagine talking for like 50 just into a Zoom screen. But took questions from students, a lot of questions, so many questions based on, I'm new to Athens. I'm not getting this experience of being able to just like walk around downtown and see what's open. I'm not getting the experience of being able to like meet up with my friends from orientation and walk through Tate and see what events are going on, or going to the involvement fair together and really answering for students. What does Athens have to offer? And that was really cool for us because, like we said, that's the spirit of the event. Um, the other part that we did super cool, I don't know if I mentioned this already, but when we talked about picking a dish that students could create, we, within the food policy, we went out and bought a bunch of dry spaghetti noodles and handed those out to students. So I think that really speaks to being creative with the way that when you decide on what the activity of your event is going to be, what the recaptured spirit is going to be, what policies are in place, and how can you work through those policies to still create an active event for students. We knew this was going to be a cooking class. We wanted to do some of the work for students. So when we got the recipe list, we went out and bought a bunch of dry pasta, and we did let people come up and pick them up in Tate, and just showed us that they were registered for the event. They got their spaghetti noodles. That was already one of the ingredients down. They basically just had to buy the stuff to make the sauce. Not every organization is going to have the resources to do massive kind of like take and make activities. But if you are an organization that normally collects programming dues, or an organization that normally has some kind of activities funding, allocating funds to kind of offset and create a little bit of buy-in for, or a little bit of incentive for your attendees to go the rest of the way, goes a long way to kind of overall increasing participation. So that's just another thing to consider. So speaking now again to leadership, what to do, what should you as the student leader kind of really focus on during this period and the run up to the event? So you and other members of your leadership team should think about what the spirit you want to capture for the event is. What is, for Union, what was Taste of Athens about? And that was about showing new students or people who are new to Athens what our community has to offer. Okay, with that spirit in mind, what virtual format is best for you? Said earlier, there's 1,000 virtual formats y'all can use. Pretty much everyone's using Zoom nowadays. We're on Zoom. People think that, oh, I'm going to have a large event, I need Zoom webinar. I'm going to tell you right now, odds are you do not need Zoom webinar unless you are having like an individual, and even sometimes not even an individual, but if you are having like a moderated conversation and you are expecting 1,000 people to be there, yes, you need Zoom webinar. If you are trying to have a small group conversation, if you are trying to do a smaller activity, if you are trying to do something where even you're using up to the 300 and there's only like a few people speaking, there are, with all the updates that Zoom has put out in like the last few months, there are ways to create a Zoom meeting that are similar to Zoom webinar and functionality, to the point that so much of Zoom webinar, what Zoom webinar offers to us now, is just the expanded room capacity, and not as much so the functionality, with few exceptions, whether that's being able to quickly disable chat, or having a more kind of central viewing platform, and being able to create a more produced event. If you're an event that doesn't need Zoom, and you're an event that you want to use Slack, you want to use Discord, you want to use something that's maybe more geared towards typing and audio, all of those platforms are free and they make for great uses depending on the context. So just do your research. Odds are you don't need to use a premium function of any kind of software at this point. Would definitely encourage y'all to just kind of see what's out there and see what might be best for your organization. Number 3, this one's kind of cheating, but it's essentially do everything else. Do all the other work for planning your event, whether that's, do you need a vendor? What areas are there for volunteer engagement? What's our marketing plan? How are we going to make sure that this event is both engaging for us, the people who are planning it, as well as the people who are going to attend it? This is really the guts of it. And then finally, kind of putting a bow on what I was just talking about for all the digital formats. Test run any new platforms before the event. Please don't do them during. It is very hard to learn software on the fly. Y'all are the tech generation. I believe in y'all's ability to kind of figure it out as you go. Save yourself some headache and just schedule like a 1 hour walkthrough earlier in the week or earlier in the day. It will make a lot of difference. If anything, just peace of mind for when y'all hit like the let people into the room on Zoom. Some things just to kind of think about and key in on. I don't want to make it sound like Union's perfect and that we like nailed everything. Everyone's kind of figuring this out as we go. So here are some things that we truly did kind of fail to consider when we did our first attempt at really pivoting a signature event to a virtual format. We didn't anticipate residence hall restrictions on common spaces for cooking. And in all honesty, that probably should have been a pretty big realization that when we created this cooking event and we thought that we were going to be able to get students in residence halls to be a part of it and turn out for it, knowing that housing wasn't going to allow for students to, or for multiple students to be in the same cooking space, should have kind of made us reconsider what dishes we were looking at and what might be our options and just how much of a participating factor would that end up being. Could have expanded the Q&A beyond food, invited city officials to be part of the event. He was a wonderful individual who's been at Athens for 20 years. So he had plenty to talk about in terms of food, culture, nightlife, even outside of Athens into Atlanta greater area. Just might have been cool to have some like additional perspective. Here's my biggest one, and it's going to be the biggest one for y'all to consider. A lot of online events are inherently low engagement for volunteers. What I mean by that is that it is surprisingly easy to produce mini a Zoom event or mini an online event. Unless your event is going to rely on like multiple breakout rooms or multiple people facilitating different sections, odds are you're going to have a pretty light volunteer list for your event. Union has over 60 members. This event required 3 of them. And this is an event that normally is all hands on deck to the point that like all 4 committees are represented in the volunteering for it. So to go from that to literally 3 members being involved in the call is pretty dramatic. Low engagement over the course of the year, I would be remiss to not mention that it does lead to low morale for members. So how are you spreading out responsibility? Do you have people who would normally be leaders or those on your exec board that you're asking to kind of, hey, take a step back because we're not getting the opportunity to kind of give our younger members the experience to train for future leadership that they normally get. You all have to kind of come up with your own game plan for what's right for y'all, but just know that these events, there's still a lot of planning. They're not as much work when it comes to the actual day of the event. Your mileage may vary though. Finally, digital engagement is strongest at turning out people who are already engaged. We're seeing this a lot with when we send out post-event survey data, that when people say that I heard about this event because I follow Union on Instagram, odds are that person has been to another Union event before or something that got them to kind of follow Union on Instagram to begin with. Again, this is speaking more to you organizations that are doing work that goes outside of your organization and are doing like campus-wide programming. But if you are really looking to bring someone new in, you are going to have to find a way to still rely on kind of traditional tabling or traditional in-person kind of getting the word out. Because odds are if you're solely relying on digital media, you're only going to be like marketing to people who already know who you are and already know what your events are. I think that's about it. So that's my email at the top if anyone has any specific questions that they want to email me after, but I am also open to take any questions from our attendees right now and try to talk to you all a little bit more about campus-wide programming and how to do signature events at this time.
If you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself or you can send it in the chat. I'm more than happy to read it out to Drew. It doesn't look like any questions at the moment. Oh, just kidding.
Oh,
Drew, Leah asked, I know we've seen cases with Zoom bombing. Do you have any tips on making sure online events remain secure?
yeah, my two biggest tips are enable every, and they're going to sound so like rudimentary. So, like, I apologize. I truly am sincere about these, but enable every security measure that you can on the Zoom settings. It is easier to turn things off in the call than it is to turn them back on once the call has begun. So, whether that is enabling wait room, enabling password, enabling all of the abilities for the moderator to quickly eject people from the room, assigning alternative hosts so that those people also have the power. If you have one person with mod power in the call, then you, the person who started it, are the only person capable of doing all these things. So by enabling an alternative host or assigning someone a co-host once the call has begun, that kind of spreads out the ability for if someone is the first one to catch someone, or someone, if you're focused on giving the presentation and someone's being abusive in the chat, someone who's not focused on the presentation can be the one to remove that person. The second is trying to limit how you are advertising your event, or how you are advertising your organization. I understand that this puts a lot of onus on or people to kind of be their own police. However, when you are, whether it's limiting your limiting how you're sending out the Zoom to various channels, whether you're creating a separate barrier for how you're advertising the channels. I will say one thing Union has done for a lot of our events is that we do the initial registration on Qualtrics. And then once we make one of the questions require students to give us their name and email. When we have their email and we're able to verify that that is in fact a UGA email, we then import it into the attendance list. So by giving yourself some like additional barriers, it really goes a long way, and not just something where someone can find a link and immediately be a part of your call. Great question.
And one other thing that we've found really helpful, in addition to using Qualtrics or any Google Forms, is using Zoom's registration feature directly too. That's what we've been doing for all these workshops, and you can customize the questions or just keep it with the name and email. And I'm not trying to jinx us, but we've had no issues so far by just having people do that and get emailed the link directly. So whatever works best for your organization. Are there any other questions? Drew, how far in advance would you recommend starting to market event or spreading the word? Have you all found that there's too early that people forget, or if there's like that perfect balance of starting to advertise?
So this is going to be hard for me because, again, ripe old age of 26, I've learned that students are not really using Facebook anymore. And I am a byproduct of an era where the event was on Facebook. You found out the event was happening on Facebook. You clicked going on Facebook, and Facebook was how you got continued updates. One of the biggest things that I've had to learn is how to engage people on Instagram. I was a late adopter to Instagram to begin with, and now I think we do the majority of our active marketing via Instagram. The spot that we're most comfortable with is that we formally like hard announce our events 2 weeks in advance. We have found that that gives us the most amount of flexibility in terms of making the initial announcement and then doing follow-up announcements, whether that's like additional posts or particularly, I know our last two external chairs have been really big on the story functions for Instagram and Facebook, and kind of using those for more kind of constant updates rather than constantly loading our feed with reposts of the exact same graphic. But 2 weeks is kind of going to give you the most flexibility. Union's also unique in that we announce our entire programming. We generally announce our entire programming for the semester, like on the first day of classes when you pick up the Union calendar. We have gone away from that this year. It's given us much more flexibility to do monthly spreads, because as I'm sure other people have been subject to, you never know when a new policy is going to come down and change, or when you're going to have the opportunity to add an event that you didn't think you'd be able to do before. So yeah, that 2 to 3 weeks is roughly the sweet spot, I'd say.
Awesome. And then I know a lot of student organizations collaborate with one another. Do you have any tips for collaboration in program planning or putting on events?
Yeah, my biggest tip is, and maybe not so much a tip, but just kind of a consideration, is that the organization that you are trying to partner with, odds are, has at least some variable differences to the way your organization programs. And I say that because I think it's a consideration to think or to notify another organization as far in advance as you like physically can that you are trying to collaborate. Union gets several collaboration requests a year. The only ones that are automatic no's are when someone tells us, hey, we're doing this event in 2 weeks and we'd really like Union to be a part of it. We do not have that flexibility in the way that we do our programming. Our programming is generally done months in advance in terms of when like that initial prep work begins. So smaller org to smaller org, you're going to have much more flexibility. If college Republicans and Young Dems, if they want to do kind of a pop-up debate or pop-up debate barbecue, they're going to have much more flexibility to do that, say on a month's notice, than Union and one of the MSP organizations, or Union and Prism, someone out of like one of our other resource organizations, because we are much larger, like university sponsored organizations. Things just kind of inherently move slower for those entities. So your mileage may vary. I think that's my biggest thing, because I think otherwise it really just comes down to what your relationship with that other group looks like, whether or not you have a history of programming together. And then from there, it's just communication, and making sure everyone understands what their role is in whatever event you're trying to pull off.
Thanks, Drew. It looks like that is all the questions that we have at the moment, but if any other questions come to mind while watching the recording, feel free to email Drew at nabaker@uga.edu, or you can email els@uga.edu. Our next student organization Zoom series is going to be next Tuesday, October 13th at 4 p.m. And we're going to be focusing on fundraising and funding. So if you have questions about the on-campus fundraising policies or additional funding sources to put on some events, like the different ideas that Drew shared today, feel free to join us then. And we look forward to seeing y'all there. Thanks so much. And let us know if you have any questions.